Okay, welcome back, and let's talk about trends. Let me go over to maps here again. Actually, let's go into the groups. Let's go down to our favorite group, Exton, and look at a particular trend. I'm going to go to KPIs. And before I click on the trend, just know that there's a lot of ways to get to a trend in our software. You saw it on the geo map. You saw it on the group map. If I click the status icon, it'll go to a trend. If I click the sparkline, it'll go to a trend. If I click the bullet chart, even if I click the name, although that can be overridden. So let's just click on this gross megawatts KPI and open it up. Okay. This is an example of a trend. In this particular case, it's a KPI trend. So there's 3 types of trends that you'll run into in our software, or 4 really. A KPI trend, and then there's a cousin of the KPI trend, which is an SPC trend. It's still a KPI, but has some additional functionality. So let's consider KPIs and SPC as one type of trend. The second is a managed trend. That means the administrator made it up. It might have 3 or 4 different things going on, or 20 different things going on the trend, and it was sort of custom made and available to everybody. The last one is the ad hoc trend, which we already covered a bit. You can make one from scratch, or you can take an existing trend and add additional pens to it or take them away. Okay, so I'm looking at a KPI trend. Let's talk about some of the things that you can do with this trend. First of all, it's an automatically running trend. As new data comes in, it'll move along the screen without me doing anything about it. Now, if I have it set to when my mouse hovers over it, it'll stop moving so that I can interact with it, etc. But you can put this up on a big screen and watch this go by all day long. Okay, so navigating through this trend, I've got a lot of different options. So first, I have this ability to drag this trend. Okay, and this is the now time on the trend. I have the legend, of course. If I want to go back in time, I have multiple ways to do that. I can drag it. I can click the paddle. That's going to go back in time. Go forward in time, etc. If I've ever customized my view, like zoomed out, and I want to get back to the original way it looked, I can just go up to the revert button here, click on that. That'll take me back to my original time range, etc. So that's one way to move around the map. The second is zooming, and you have multiple ways to zoom. On your phone, you can use pinch to zoom with your fingers. You can double click to zoom, which I just did. You can use your mouse wheel, which I'm doing now, to zoom in or out. You can box zoom, which is right up here in the toolbar. So if I want to look at something smaller, I can. And this brings up a very interesting point about our trends. What makes them so fast and so lightweight, even when it has to go interact with the data source. So this happens to be a pretty dense trend. There's a lot of information in it. So let me revert back. One thing that we do is automatic downsampling of data. So if I was looking at a trend where I'm collecting data 100 times per second, and I'm looking at a year-long trend, so millions and millions of points in there, then there's no reason for me to pull all that information to my phone, because my phone only has 400 pixels wide to show it in. So we automatically figure that out. Some data sources do that for us, but when they don't, we do it for them as well. And every time we need to go get more data, you can see how fast it is. So when I drag back in time here, when I let go of my mouse, you'll see that it fills in quite quickly all of the information here. That went all the way back to the data source. And in this particular one, there's a lot of calculations involved too, and that's how fast it went. Same thing is true with zooming. This is a dense trend, so if I zoom in on something fairly small, when I let go here, you'll see it zoom in on what it could see, and then while it's doing that, it goes and gets more data and fills in the blanks. And I'll do that again just to show you. If I click on just something really small here, now we're down to the actual resolution of this particular trend. Okay, so again, very fast and very lightweight thing. So I can box zoom, etc. Let's revert back to the original trend and talk about a few other navigation options for the trend, or just ways to work with the trend. And we'll just kind of go through the toolbar, but I'm going to start over here on the right a little bit. So cursor mode is a really valuable one. So this is one where you can actually just get in here, and let me zoom in on this stuff a little bit so you can see it a little bit more intelligently. So this is going to show me all the values if I want to investigate. And I can click and that'll lock one set of cursors and give me a second one. And then click again if I want to and add more of these cursors. So if I really want to investigate and check out some values, I can do so. Let me zoom back out here and look at this trend. Okay, so that's cursor mode. The other one is snap to, and I want to find a different trend to show you snap to. Let me find an interpolated trend. Here's one here. Let's zoom in on this particular trend. This is also going to be a little bit dense, so let me make sure I'm down to some individual values. Let's zoom one more. Okay, so here we are, and if my cursor, you can see, just goes along smoothly along that line because it's an interpolated trend, so it's drawing the line between any values that exist in your data source. Now, if I want to only see values that actually exist in the data source and not what appears between them, can turn on snap to mode, and then as I drag my mouse, you'll see it snaps only to places where a value actually exists. So that's the snap to mode. Okay, I'll turn that off. Got my cursors, my drag mode, and my box zoom mode. Now let's look over here. Let's go to the gear icon here. I can change scale. So if I'm looking at multiple pens and I want them to all overlap, there are ones, between 0 and 1 and ones between 0 and 10,000, and I want to actually see the correlation, I want to make that multi-scale. I can also change the pen type. So let's change this from interpolated to step. Now you can see I changed that way. Or change it again to symbol trend. Now you're only going to see those dots, for example, right? So that's changing the pen type, etc. And I'll revert back. Changing the time range, probably one of the most popular things you can do, either by zooming, that'll automatically change it, or you can pick from the list or put in your own custom time range. So if I want to make this a 20-minute trend, I can do so. Now I see that. Okay, time range, I can also export trends in two ways. I can export them to CSV, which is going to let me open it in Excel or another CSV application and let me do further analysis on it. I can also view the raw data right inside the browser. So if I'm on my phone and I want to investigate a certain value that exists in here, and I don't have Excel or don't want to open it in that, I just want to see, then I can see the particular values. There's my my limits and target, and here's all the actual values that appeared on that trend. So if I want to look for an exact point in time or the point at which it hit a certain value, I can do so right here. Okay, so that's exporting the trend. And the last thing I'll show you is details. So, and this is really KPI details, but I'm going to go to it from the trend here. The reason it's going to take a second is because it's going to also calculate a bunch of statistics and do other things. So the trend details, I have, everything about this KPI, its info column, its description, what status it is currently, all of its limits, its spark line, its target, all these various things, any alert functions, and then all the statistics. So I'm on a, let's see, what's my time range here? I'm on a, where's my time range? Yeah, here we go, on my paddles here. And it's going to say that in this 1 week, here's how many values I have. Here's the average, min, max, range, and standard deviation. So on any KPI or any trend, you're going to be able to get this. Here's if there's any parameters in use, and that's a feature you can learn about in the designer course. Custom attributes that might be associated with it, and any groups that it's a member of. So you can learn a lot more detail about any KPI, or in this case, any trend. You could also view it on a map, etc. So that is a little bit about trends. Now I'm going to show you one more trend here. Let me go all the way up to my dashboard. I want to show you the SPC trend. So just a cousin or a sibling of the regular KPI trend. And let's make this full screen and we can show it. And before I get started talking about it, I'm going to turn off the SPC function. So this is a normal trend, interpolated plus symbol type. So you see the little dots on it. And in the legend, all I'm showing is the actual. Now there's the KPI part of it. You can see here, these are the KPI limits that were defined by whoever set up this KPI. They could be flat like this, or they could be moving. They could be coming from the same or different data sources, or even have calculations in them. But in this case, they're just flat. Okay, that's the KPI part. I'll turn that off. And then the second part is the SPC part. So if whoever set up this trend determined that it is an SPC KPI, then it has some automatically generated limits. So it has the X bar, 1, 2 standard deviations or sigma, and then the upper and lower control limits of each. So that's one part of being SPC, is that over this 1 week, it's calculating those limits. If I change the time range, those limits will be calculated differently. So I'm on a week, let's go to a day. In 1 day, you can see they're much more narrow, that average and all those pieces. Okay. The other thing that it's doing is employing the Western Electric rules for SPC. And there's several of these rules. We support the 4 main rules for Western Electric, and on this particular KPI, 2 of them have been put in place. So that's Western Electric Rule 3 and Western Electric Rule 4. These are just rules that say, if a certain number of KPIs are outside of this limit for in this range, then I have failed my test, right? I am in or out of control. So I can turn those off so I can see where I've violated, where the rule takes place. This is a little bit easier on the on the 1 week trend, but you can see those where those rules have been violated or where they haven't. Okay, so that's a little bit about SPC. Again, the setup of that is mentioned in the designer training, and there'll be also additional videos about more detailed ways to use SPC. So that is all you need to know about trends in Visual KPI. Next, we'll move on and look at some other visualizations. See you there.